You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. It's Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the big show. We certainly appreciate you guys. For 16 darn years, my back is tired. We brought you over 2,200 shows. The CEOs, the billionaires, the White House presidential advisors, Pulitzer Prize winners, the governors, the congressmen, all the smartest people in the world that bring you their stories, their journeys, their lessons of life, things to make your life better. And if it doesn't make your life better, I'm going to pull the car over and come back there, damn it. So be better or else. Anyway, they're going to be giving us their insights today on how to make your life better and deal with conflict resilience. This is probably a great book if you're married or you have teenagers. So I'm not sure about that. It might be just good for business. Their new book is out March 18th, 2025. My God, we're in 2025 already. It is entitled Conflict Resilience, Negotiating Disagreement Without Giving Up or Giving In. Robert Bordone is on the show with us today, and Joel Salinas is on the show. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Give us your .coms. Where can people find you on the interwebs?
Great. We're, first of all, thrilled to be here, and I can be found at bobbordone.com. That's BOBBORDONE.com. And Dr. Salinas, where can they find you?
Well, SalinasMD.com, and you can find out more about our book at conflictresilience.book.com.
Conflictresilience.book.com. That's where we want you to go right now.
So my first question to you guys is, why didn't you add at the end of it how to negotiate disagreement without giving up or giving in and choking out the other person? Why did you leave that end part off? No.
Oh, that's a good question.
See, this is why you need me to write the titles for these books, people. This is how we get stuff sold. So if you would, please, I'll give each of you a shot at it. Tell us 30,000 overview. What's inside your new book?
Sure, great. So our book is called Conflict Resilience, and it is a book about how to handle conflict. But the subtitle, I think, belies something that can be surprising to people, because it's really not a book about conflict resolution, but it's really a book about how do you disagree with other people and stand your ground, but also maintain the relationship and stay connected to them. And we think the book is really timely because right now in this polarized moment in business and in families and in communities, we see so many people either exiting or thinking that the only choice is to fight. We think there is a different way, and that's what the book is about. But it also has the added bonus, and I'm going to invite my colleague to speak about this, it has the added bonus of bringing to it not just strategies, but also the brain science behind it, and some brain hacks so that this feels implementable, real, and grounded in science.
Awesome. Science is great.
Yeah. And I'm a neurologist, researcher. My background is at Mass General Harvard Medical School, faculty at NYU Langone Health, and chief medical officer, co-founder of a company called Isaac Health to provide services for people with brain health issues. And, Bob and I started working on this when we both kind of, in our own kind of spheres, we're seeing people having a harder and harder time just sitting with disagreement, just really having a hard time tolerating when somebody was different than you or kind of disagreed with you. And Bob has his wealth of experience as like an internationally renowned kind of negotiator and mediator kind of in this area. But from my perspective, I've done a lot of research in social connection and social relationships, and there's this real kind of brain wiring that we all have kind of built into each other that makes it so hard to be able to put up with the people around us. You kind of mentioned kind of choking people out. And we kind of, as Neanderthals, like out in the savannah, there's mechanisms there that made it very easy for us to want to take the other out, right, to survive. Mm-hmm. And that makes it really hard in the world that we are in today to be able to not murder the people across the table from us. And really kind of what we're doing with the book is helping us kind of retrain or rewire our brain as well to be able to kind of better sit in those situations, but to better get to the objectives that you want out of that situation.
Mm-hmm. And we need more of that now than ever, as you guys mentioned there. I mean, we've gone from the savannah where it was probably legal to choke someone out, and don't do that, folks. It's just jokes. Don't write me, please. Seriously, the attorney made me say that. I just got a text from him. To now, like Facebook. There's a lot of Facebook and social media resolutions. I've probably blocked 500,000 people, I think, at this point over politics and stupidity like conspiracy theories and the world is flat. Everybody knows it's a triangle. It's not a circle. It's not flat. That's just kidding, people. Stop it. Don't start a cult. The cults that I start in the Chris Voss Show jokes are just massive. But do you guys discuss maybe how to deal with some of the social media?
Yeah. I mean, Chris, so much of what drove this, I think at the beginning, I spent 20 years teaching full-time at Harvard Law School. Mm-hmm. And in my last 5 years teaching there, what I started to notice was, this is a school that spends thousands and thousands of dollars to recruit really diverse people from all over the world. And we do a good job of that. And I knew that because I was on the admissions committee. But then you're sitting in a classroom and it's as boring as hell. And it's as boring as hell because nobody will actually speak what they actually think because they're afraid of getting canceled, getting called out, making a mistake. And so what we realized, what I was observing, and Joel was observing similarly in his own universe, was we can bring all these really interesting people together, but if there's no ability to actually bring out our differences and talk about them, then what's the point? And I think what you said is really powerful, which is part of the reason why I think we don't engage anymore, is it's so easy to go to those social media cocoons of comfort, right? And be surrounded by the people that think like us and approve of us. And then the algorithm actually supports that. And it's easy to kind of cancel the other out. And you know what? In our social spaces, that's probably fine. But in our businesses, in our schools, in our medical centers, in our government, we can't have that and survive, right? Yeah. Your mother-in-law is always going to be your mother-in-law. Your sister is going to be your sister. And you got to figure out a way, if you want that relationship to persist, not to agree, but to actually disagree better and not choke them or just hope you see them for 45 minutes every Thanksgiving.
Yeah. I mean, this is an important book you're putting out in March. Why couldn't you have this for, my Christmas dinner that I'm going to be having up here soon with the family? What's going on, guys?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, timing is maybe everything. Although, part of what we were thinking is that, especially coming out of the election, right? Some people are obviously rejoicing, and some people are licking their wounds. I know people who said, I'm putting up the Christmas tree on November 1st, and we were thinking that people need a few months to just kind of sit with whatever their new reality is. And we're hoping that people will be ready to engage and interested in realizing that, listen, after the first 100 days of Trump, there's going to be 3 years and 9 months to go. And maybe people will be a little bit ready wherever they sit on that political fence. Because this is not a political book, really. It's a book of tools. It's a book of brain hacks. And so we don't know if the timing's right, but we think that that's when people might be hungering and hoping for something different.
It's probably available in Canada too. There'll be a lot of Democrats moving up there, and
it'll be in Canada and all sorts of other places where they might use it. Yeah.
Joel, did you want to jump in here on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the timing is just so important. In addition to kind of the political climate that we're in, but in where social media is at, I think we're just seeing a real decline in the ability to develop those social skills to be in kind of these conflict situations with each other. And I think one of the things that we really harp on in the book is that it's not just being in conflict for the sake of being in conflict, is that there's something in it for you to engage in that conflict to really get out of it. So whether it's, something at work or something related to your family members, it's really important to know that there is something to be gained that will meet your own kind of needs by sitting and being with that situation. You learn about the other person, you learn about the perspective. Doesn't mean you agree with them, but you know more about the world, and you're better able to trust each other in that relationship. So you can actually accomplish something else. Our own brain systems are really wired to kind of label kind of people as trustworthy or not. And it happens pretty quickly within just a matter of seconds. And there's this kind of reaction that your brain has when you don't trust others, and certain kind of things that your brain will let slide when you do trust them. And if you want to develop a really strong relationship with kind of coworkers or partners or anybody else in your life, I mean, I think it behooves you to develop a relationship of trust so that way you can actually work together to accomplish whatever it is that you want to accomplish.
So we didn't do bios on both you guys. Give me a rundown on your backgrounds. How'd you guys grow up? What motivated you to go down the road you led down, and then the proponent that led to the book?
Yeah, sure. Gosh, where to start? By training, I'm a lawyer, although I haven't practiced law very much. I spent 21 years on the faculty at Harvard Law School, where I founded the school's negotiation mediation clinical program, and really started my kind of professional interest around the idea of problem solving, around the idea of collaborative negotiating. How can we come together and create value? That was something that I think always was interesting to me. It's probably part of what sent me to law school. A part of what made me not be a lawyer, to be honest, was feeling that so much of lawyering ends up being about making problems worse. But the part that appealed to me was the problem-solving instinct. And yes, started a clinic there. And over the years that I was doing my work, I had a growing interest in the kind of psychological and emotional and identity-based parts of conflict. Many times people are fighting about an issue, but it's not about the issue. It's about something mom did, 15 years ago that's still rubbing me the wrong way, or deep insecurities. And so a lot of my writing started and interest started to shift to helping people kind of think about their internal conflicts and then starting to really realize that so much of the problem wasn't about the fact that we disagree. It was that we didn't know how to disagree. And so I continue to be really interested. I do a lot of professional training in negotiation and mediation. I run a small boutique firm called the Cambridge Negotiation Institute. But this book for me, and the collaboration with Joelle has in many respects been a real pinnacle, because it's allowing me to marry, and hopefully this book marries the cusp of business, but also personal transformation, and having that be kind of buttressed by kind of brain research and actual academic background. So that ability to combine both the skills and real life piece with the research piece. That's probably way too much and you wanted to know. I'm sure Joel's going to do a much better job of talking about himself than I just did.
I grew up in Miami, Florida. And, I think what led me into the medical field and specifically into neurology was really a deep fascination for, understanding, why we think what we think, feel what we feel, do what we do, really just trying to understand what makes people tick. And, I got drawn in more and more into the specific field of neurology called behavioral neurology, which is really focused on kind of our brain and our behaviors. And we often manage people who have conditions like Alzheimer's disease and other kind of memory and thinking related changes. But for me, it was a really important way to understand kind of that question of like why we do what we do. I did all my clinical training at Massachusetts General Hospital and Brigham and Women's Hospital, was faculty at Mass General and Harvard Medical School for many years. Wow. Helped to develop their Center for Brain Health and served as clinical director. Then in 2020, moved to New York, where I became faculty at NYU Langone, continued to see patients there. And then in the last kind of 3 years, I've also done a lot of work in helping to found and serve as chief medical officer for this online memory center that I mentioned called Isaac Health to really improve access to care. But a lot of my career has also been defined by research that I've done, really looking at social relationships, how the people around us shape our brain and how our brain shapes kind of the world around us. And in kind of making a connection with Bob on this topic, it just felt really important. I think one of the things that we've seen in the research world is that things like social isolation and loneliness are not only, really important in determining your health. Being lonely is about as risky, if not more risky than smoking and obesity for your health, but it's becoming more common. And it's becoming more common in kind of people who are over 65, but it's also becoming a lot more common in younger people too.
Yeah.
And this is going to have a real impact on public health and in the future. And so one component of that is this really social relationships piece of one connection. And if you don't have the tools or the skills to be able to connect with others, certainly you're going to find yourself in a position where you're very, very isolated. And of course, with that, very, very lonely. So I see it as a public health imperative to be able to help us kind of grin and bear working with each other, and God forbid, actually enjoy kind of working with each other despite disagreeing with each other.
I mean, I think an important piece, if I could just pick up on what Joel said, right? I think of this book that that we want to drive, right, is that sometimes people think conflict is bad, and the reality is conflict can be bad, worse than bad. It affects your actual health, but if you handle it well, it isn't bad, right? So the avoidance, the anxiety, the stress of the avoidance that leads to the disconnection and the end of the relationship, that is what's bad, right? Yeah. Or, take it the other direction, the kind of violence that, the political violence, right? Yeah. Or fighting, that also is real stressors that affect individual health. But finding the engagement, I'm teaching this year at Georgetown, and I had a student who said to me after class one day, I feel like the worry about having that difficult conversation was way worse than the difficult conversation.
Yeah.
And that insight, I think I have found to be the case over and over and over again, that when we think about we often focus on the fears of having a hard conversation, but we're not taking account of the cost of avoiding. And those costs are high.
That's an interesting thing to think about, the cost. Well, we always pay the price, but we won't pay the cost, as Pierre said. Several things there that are kind of interesting. One, Joel was talking about the brain health and stuff. And, I've talked with my mom, who's 82. It's important, that she's gotten isolated, she's aged, and most older folks do these days. They get isolated, and then it seems like dementia and Alzheimer seems to accelerate. My sister has MS, and she's been in care centers for probably 10, 15 years now, and she's at a point where dementia is accelerating, and and her being technically isolated in a home is bad. One thing that, and I think you're right, there's sometimes you avoid that person on Facebook who has the conspiracy theories or has the political things that are very toxic or racist. I think that's one of the hardest things that people have had with the Trump thing, is it's not about, you're a Republican, I'm a Democrat, and you believe in big government, and I believe in less government, whatever the hell it used to be before that, to where it just became full-on racism and xenophobia and, tossing out kind of the norms of decency that we used to have, encouraging violence and stuff. And it's hard to have that discussion with people, because you're like, I'd like to get along, but I don't want to be seen with you, because one of the problems you have is if you go hang out with KKK members all day long, people think you're with them.
Yeah.
And I had people reaching out to me on Facebook, because we have a big brand there, going, you're still friends with this guy. And, he's pretty, he's repeating a lot of racist stuff from the thing. And so you agree with him? And you're like, whoa. And, a lot of brands, I think, kind of felt that way. But you're right, trying to consider the costs. And you mentioned, Bob, the loss of it. I've had friends that been friends with for a million years. I thought I knew them. I always thought they were good people. And I think deep down they mostly are. But, one day someone said it was okay to spout racist epithets and that's politically expedient, and they copied it and normalized it, and you're just like, I'm gonna lose. When you have to block them finally, it hurts. There's still people that I kind of grieve for that I've lost throughout my life, because I can't, they bought the Tesla Cybertruck, had to unfriend all those people and block them. I'm just teasing.
But hey, Chris, can I make two? I think there's two things, two threads I'd love to take from what you said.
It's just an ugly truck. That was all. Really.
Yeah.
It's not even a truck.
My next door neighbor has a Tesla, so there's literally, we share a driveway. So
call the HOA.
But anyway, but the two serious things I want to take from what you're saying that I think we want to stress, and the first, right, I think is, and we try to really thread this needle carefully in what we write, which is we really want to distinguish that quality or belief that we feel that people need to develop some toughness for being uncomfortable in difficult conversations from you should subject yourself to abuse and trauma, because that is not what this book is about. And we really want to make that distinction, and we offer some guidance for that, because there is a line between this is unpleasant and uncomfortable. You know what? Life, like lots of things in life, are uncomfortable, including sometimes conflict, from this is damaging. Right. So that's one thing I'd want to say. The other thing I think that you said as such a big challenge in this moment is when you're hearing from other people saying, why are you consorting with A, B, C, or D? And part of what we want to try to address here is, and I think it's a personal concern of mine, and I think Joel's, although he can speak for himself, is that as we have become more tribal, there is a cost of engaging across the lines, right? Our people say your even decision to consort with them is a betrayal. One of the people who endorses our book, and I've had the real honor of doing some work with, is former Congressman Adam Kinzinger. And here's a guy who his politics are extremely conservative. I mean, his politics are not my politics. Just the fact, though, that he has worked across the line on, I would argue, issues of basic decency and integrity have made him a persona non grata. Yeah. And so that's something that, you just talked about that in your own life, right? And it makes it harder to kind of cross the transept when even that decision to do a little engagement is experienced by the other as betrayal.
Yeah, I like how you said that it's the tribalness. Joel, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, and I think this element of like tribalism, and there is this, going back to this idea of like how we survive in the savannah, right, is, potential threats, is what helps us to survive. Being able to predict the potential threat, being able to hear a rustling in the bush and think that, that's a saber-toothed tiger, and giving us that fight or flight response. Those things help to protect us and help us to survive and evolve. But those same mechanisms are still in our brain now. And so what ends up happening is if we begin to perceive others or kind of what they do, or kind of the groups that we label them as being a part of as a threat or potential threat. And this, they may be an actual threat, but even just kind of a slight kind of relation to that thing that you kind of perceive as a threat can trigger these systems in your brain that are kind of very similar to kind of that Neanderthal in the savannah. So for example, these parts of the brain called like salient systems and valence systems that really help to like trigger alarms and kind of pull your attention, start to kind of activate. And then if those get to a certain point, then you get more of that fight or flight response that then floods, kind of making your heart rate increase, your respiratory rate increase, blood pressure go up, muscles contract. And now you're in this kind of place where you're ready to fight or run away or avoid. And the more you try to respond to that by kind of avoiding completely, like blocking people, right, on social media, or supplanting them, kind of just like saying, this is my point, and then there's no other point of view there. What ends up happening is that your brain starts to then kind of increase the wiring there. So that way the volume of that becomes even greater and greater. And so now even like the slightest kind of threat, you're just so sensitized to it, you're much more likely to flee or kind of supplant it altogether, or however you typically react to these conflict situations. And it just makes it way, way worse and much more difficult to manage. And so what we want with the book is to find ways to kind of really have a circuit breaker in that system. And even if it's just a matter of being aware of what's going on in your brain and your body in these conflict situations, because awareness is really more than half the battle here.
That's really interesting to know, because with trauma, people probably build those same sort of the brain thing that you were talking about, the fight or flight. one of the problems I had from childhood trauma, and it was unresolved at the time, was in 2016 when I don't respond well to gaslighting. I mean, and I go to that fight or flight, angry. And I think for 4 years I was, keyboard warrior of, whatever. And that was a big waste of time, I guess, in my life. But I don't know, whatever. But the other thing I was going to fall back with you, and I think you said it, Bob, is COVID really, and isolation, we talked about it with old people, really hurt people and may have stunted their brains or stunted their psychology. You guys are the professionals on this. I'm not. I'm just some guy with a mic. But I run a big singles group, and there's about 3,400 people in it. And what I've tried to do, because dating apps are just, they're not designed to get you in relationships. They're designed to keep you paying them money for eternity.
Yeah, that's
until
for
the
sure.
cats eat you.
Keep swiping.
Yeah. And so I do a thing, because I come from old world dating. I'm about 100 years older than you guys. And back then, we used to take the women on these dates. We'd ask them out. We'd be like, hey, you're pretty. You want to go on a date? And then we'd take them to dinner. It's really cool. Yeah. And they didn't have Netflix and chill back then. And we started, and that's how people used to meet each other. They'd usually meet through family or work, and then we outlawed all that, family and work. And have these meetups where a couple times a month, all the singles get together and mix and mingle, and stuff happens. But what's funny to me is we've had trouble getting people out. We have 400 people in the group, and we can barely get 50 to 100 people out.
Yeah.
And I'll talk to both women and men. It's not a sex issue. Maybe they're afraid of having sex with each other. I don't know. But it's a male or female issue. And they'll tell me, they're like, I'm scared to go out and, meet strangers. And these aren't 20-year-olds. Like when I was 20, I was, big adult.
And they're interested in dating.
Yeah, and they're interested in dating, and we're in a group on Facebook, so everybody can see each other, and we were trying to run a real positive, healthy group, but they're just so afraid. And I'm like, you go into a place with strangers at 7-Eleven, at the gas station. You're walking into strangers' places all day long. But because we got so isolated with COVID and remote working, it seems like they've either lost the skill or development. Maybe, Joel, they've lost whatever that brain muscle was,
I think you're totally right. I mean, sorry, Joe, you go, Joel. Joel, you go first.
No, I was just going to say that there's this extreme sensitization that's going on in the brain, and maybe they did kind of were in a situation where they were with a stranger and it was really, really negative. But I think this point about being afraid to be in a situation where someone is has a very different political belief than you or different ideology from you, and not wanting to even engage because of what might happen or how negative that experience will be, you're missing out on a lot. I mean, if you look around, you see that there are plenty of relationships where both people are ideologically or value kind of wise are aligned, but there are also relationships where one person is extremely liberal and the other person is really conservative, and outside of the political beliefs, they're actually a really great couple. Yeah. So if you're not able to manage somebody having a different viewpoint of your own, one, you're missing out on potentially the love of your life.
Yeah. I mean, it used to be that was kind of normal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, what this observation you're making, Chris, about dating, right, is one that I think is being replicated in all sorts of contexts. I mean, I got to tell you, I have had a non-trivial amount of business that has come around conflicts between folks who want people to come back to in-person work and folks who don't. And it's not just about the commute, right? It's about anxiety around needing to kind of show up, the discomfort of having the boss in the same room, right? And then you have other people who are saying so much of the creativity, the generative, what happens is the fact that we're physically there, not like we're all in the same space every second, but it's what do we do when we're getting a coffee? Or if I have an idea and I jump into your office, and we all know that there's qualitative difference between a meeting on Zoom. I mean, it's really nice to be with you, Chris, this way, but we probably have a lot more fun if I could be in Utah right now and Joelle could be with us, right?
Yeah.
And it's not to say that there aren't good and valuable things happening in this space, but I think that this is like almost an extreme form of not having that kind of conflict resilience that we're talking about. And, I think it's interesting, right? Joel talks about, and a lot of his work is looking at this kind of social isolation you brought up with your mom. But we see that also with young people, right?
Yeah.
That loneliness. And so that's why, in some sense, right, the book in some ways is born of this polarized moment, but it's, I think, so much broader than that. And if there was a certain urgency, I mean, in this weird way, right, Joelle and I, we just kind of met as friends. I mean, we didn't come together originally for this collaboration, but just the more we spoke, the more we were like, we think we have to do something here, or at least try, and hopefully someone will be interested and we can produce something. And we don't know what'll happen yet because the book's not out, but we really think that this is not like a non-trivial thing we're talking about.
You guys are probably saving some lives and maybe saving our society if we can get enough people to read the book. It's interesting to me because a lot of the people who give me this anxiety thing about coming out, and there's no formal dating thing. It's not like I hate those dating things where they assign you people and you kind of like reject them. I don't like this person. Can we sit someone else? It's just a mix and mingle. And we've had so many people make friends, and I preach about building your social graph and how important it is to have a good friend. Don't worry about dating. If you build your social graph, if you build a good friends graph, you'll meet those people. Like, we just had somebody get into a relationship. They met a friend at our meetups, and that friend referred them to somebody else. And that used to be the way we engage in this. But to see people in their 50s struggling with this, I mean, I get it when you're young. I used to be afraid of adults when I was 20, and I was a young kid, and I was like, oh man, these guys, they're smart, and I'm kind of figuring out. And then the other thing is too is, my business partner, when we broke up in 2004, I've been running our companies, or what used to be our companies, that was weird, since 2004, and working from home.
Yeah.
So I've been working from home, and to me, I'm hyper social. So it's like super important to me to have lots of friends. It's super important to me to get to these four walls, to keep from going insane. And although some people think I've already been insane, yeah, it's kind of really interesting how that is. And I think you guys bring up a good point that I'm going to be thinking about, that it's the anxiety that there might be conflict when they go. I might show up and there might be a political discussion, and and that never happens. But, you might get rejected,
Yeah.
Hey, I like you. Can I get your number? Oh, no.
Yeah.
Welcome to life. Yeah.
I mean, Chris, at the heart of, I think, so much conflict avoidance is that fear of rejection. So part of putting your full self forward in a way that others can hear, but that's authentic, is showing some vulnerability. It's also part of what makes life interesting, relationships real.
Yeah.
And genuine, right? I always feel like whenever I hear someone is like, oh, we've been dating for 6 months and we haven't had a fight, I'm like, oh my gosh, something's wrong.
That's about to.
That's
one of those avalanches. It's about to.
Yeah.
It's one of those ticking bombs.
Yeah. I'm always interested in not. Oh, you're both Yankees fans. I'm like, well, how do you manage the Yankees versus Red Sox?
No.
That's what I'm really interested in. How do
I'm
you
a
manage?
Raiders fan. I can't live with myself.
I mean, so much of kind of what really underlies the book is really kind of developing almost like this prerequisite set of skills for kind of managing conflicts and negotiations. There's tons of negotiation books out there, right? There's tons of books that tell you, do this, do that, say this, don't say that. But what we're arguing here is that there's a whole set of skills before you even enter into the negotiation that you need to master. It's kind of like, if you can't stand the heat in the kitchen, how do you expect to learn how to cook?
Yeah. How do these people expect to get in a relationship? These dating people? Young men are having this problem too. I mean, we've had lots of different psychologists about young men, and a lot of the school shooters are disenfranchised young men, disaffected young men. We just saw what is, in my opinion, the masculinity vote of men embracing fascism, authoritarian type leader.
Yeah.
If you study history and the rise of fascism, it follows women's and minorities' rights becoming more powerful than men's. And when men reach a point that they can't procreate, they can't create families, they clap back. And it's usually a very powerful and ugly clap back and overextended. But, you see these people that are having these challenges, and a lot of young men. We have big gaming communities too. I'm a hyper, social dude. And so I run gaming communities too. So I'm talking to a lot of young men, and I got to have something to do when I'm playing Black Ops 6. Plus, those young people are carrying me through the game. Yeah, we got the old guy in the back. We put up with him. He fills up the team. His eyesight's shit, and his reflexes are gone, but he's got some funny jokes, and he tells us to quit using the N-word all the time. He's kind of like having a dad that we never had. Considering that's a whole nother. I'm just gonna leave that joke alone. Anyway, I just tell him, I'm like, hey, I'm sorry, I went for the milk and the eggs, never came back, kids. I'm here now. But they talk about women and dating, and they have like almost no interest in forming families, getting married. And part of it is they see what women are up to on TikTok, and some of the, women on social media don't talk to men very well or talk about them very well as people. And they're just checking out. Yeah. And so between them and the single people, it's like, how are you guys ever going to have families in a relationship? How are you going to have the fun of being able to fight over, that vase and the divorce if you don't just learn to get along first and have some kids?
Totally.
Yeah, and some of this is, I think it really is driven by our brains, right? Our brain, more than anything, is a fortune-telling machine. Our brains evolved to be able to take information that we've kind of gathered, that we've experienced, and then to tell us kind of what's coming, so we can take an action in response to that. And what ends up happening, a lot of these situations that you're describing is, people have had some experience, whether it's kind of social media, what they're told by kind of what's out in the general media about kind of what people are like or what they are. And then they're making predictions, like their brain is making these kind of almost involuntary predictions about kind of who these people will be and what they will do and what that experience of being together will look like. And it can get really demonized, right? In one extreme, where just engaging with somebody who, believes a certain way will probably kill you or hurt you or say something that will deeply offend you, or it's just going to be a big mess. And it kind of like, as Bob had mentioned before, oftentimes it's that kind of like anxiety or distress around what's potential that actually is more the problem than the actual engagement with the other person.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things we talk about in the book, just to build on what Joelle said, is part of the retraining of the brain has to be able to see what we call the BBO, the bigger, better offer, right? Because if your brain is in this kind of loop, then why would you change unless you can see something else on offer? And I think when you talk about, and without knowing this for sure, Chris, of course, but like a situation with young men, right? I think part of it might be that there's not seeing that, right? They're not seeing the path, and then they're in this. So their brain is doing what the brain does. They're in a social context that is not feeding that possibility, and in the end, everyone is, they're individually underserved. Obviously, the culture and society is underserved, and it's not inevitable, right? I mean, I think for me, there's been lots of fun aspects of writing the book, including, the hard parts of writing the book. But one of the really interesting parts for me, as somebody who does a lot of, I did a lot of law school teaching and writing on the topic, and does a lot of executive coaching and executive education. But working with Joelle, right, has kind of really been able to understand. There are it's easy to think, oh, you can't change your brain, right? It's like you can change what you say or do, but your brain is your brain. And that's actually not true. I mean, you're not going to implant new cells into your brain. But
what
there
if you're
are
Elon
some
Musk with that.
Maybe he can. Yeah. Maybe that's gonna happen.
Yeah. It'll
And
come
you
with the
can find some
auto
other
driving
people.
when it finally arrives.
Yeah. But there's a certain, by becoming aware of what's going on, there are like actual hacks that real people I'm like, I always think of, Joel's a neurologist, so he's not a real person, but I'm just like an average real person. A real person can do.
Sorry, Joel.
I mean, he's, this, but he's like this kind of expert in this. But that's kind of what's been really, really fun for me, is to come marry these things and then see how they kind of play out with real people.
One thing I do, and I don't know if this speaks to what you're talking about, but I've, in recent years, after healing my trauma, I started studying Stoicism. I got introduced to it through that one guy who writes a lot of great Stoicism books, and you may know who I'm talking about. I can't place his name off the top, but he's got a great YouTube channel, and he kind of interprets what was being said. But, so I study a lot of Marcus Aurelius meditations. It's interesting to me, a lot of the, we've had a lot of generals, and I don't know if we've had official generals, but we've had, and I believe we have. We have people that have run the head of the Theodore Roosevelt during the Trump administration, and he had the COVID crisis, and they stood up and as he walked, we had all sorts of great military people on the show, and it's funny, they'll talk to me that we'll talk maybe in the green room or something, and the Bible, their Bible is meditations, Marcus Aurelius and other Stoicism, and when you think about the conflict that they have to go through, especially when they're decision making, when you're running a nuclear aircraft carrier, and you've got to make decisions that are probably going to, if you make the wrong decisions and launch nuclear weapons, that you're responsible.
There's no redo.
Yeah, there's no redo.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's going to be conflicts. I forget the name of the gentleman. I can pull it up here, but he had Trump attacking him on social media. He was removed of his command, and he had to make a decision to, try and save his people and his crew as COVID was running through, the smallest quarters on an aircraft carrier to try and offload them to Guam, and it wasn't getting up the chain of command to the Pentagon fast enough, or, risk putting his job and his livelihood and his career at an end. There's a conflict resolution for you there. And then, of course, we've had a number of people on the show who got on the wrong side of that Donald Trump tweets. And I'm like, what is that like? And so a lot of times, meditations, Marcus Aurelius, Stoicism, one of those things. And that Stoicism is one of those things that's really helped me try and stay in negotiations, as you guys have talked to the book, Not Give Up. Yeah. And to try and learn to ride it through. Yeah. I've been a single guy all my life. I've dated wonderful women all my life, but it's number one, I can't afford the divorces, and I'm saving up a few $1 million now. I think I'm about $3 million in, so I'm almost to the point where I can afford a divorce, and then I'll get married. It's a real cheap joke, isn't it? But it's funny. Sometimes when you're dealing with people that are high in their emotions, whether men or women, and they're deep in their experience or their trauma reaction, as we talked about, it's really hard to ride that hurricane. And so Stoicism really helped me do that, and meant be a core of what you guys are talking about.
I mean, Chris, it is so much a part, and we don't use the word Stoicism, but so much a part of our advice is about the pause and about the mindfulness, and it's really interesting. I'm going to let Joel speak about the science. I mean, but as early as 2004, Harvard Law School, we had a symposium on conflict resolution and mindfulness. And I think there were some people who were like, oh my gosh, what has become of this? Is what Harvard Law School is doing. Mindfulness, what's the connection? There is a deep, deep connection. And in the actual practice of this, it's something that we really talk about and give some examples of, and also in the science. Joel.
Yeah, no, I think this meditation, mindfulness, some people describe it as like a metacognition, thinking about thinking. I mean, these types of exercises is a way of retraining your brain. We're retraining our brain to really strengthen those brain muscles that help to kind of control our attention and our own emotions, to regulate our kind of heart rate, blood pressure, muscle contractions as best as possible, so that way we can be not just in the moment, but also make decisions that are more voluntary, more deliberate, as opposed to just being guided by whatever our brain just kind of barks at it, tells us what to do.
It's how do you get out of the act-react cycle so that each move you make is driven by a purpose. And, that example you used about, kind of nuclear war escalation, right? In the negotiation world, right, so much of that was modeled through like game theory and prisoners' dilemmas and iterative game theory. And it's so consequential because things can escalate, and if you don't have that ability to take the pause, if you don't have the ability to then do the perspective taking, then your move isn't going to be a purposive move, it's going to be a reactive move.
Yeah.
And if your default is to run for the hills, that's what you're going to do. And if your default is to throw a grenade back, that's what you're going to do. And could there be times in life when running for the hills or throwing a grenade is the right thing? Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. But it should never be done as a reaction that isn't driven by thoughtful purposiveness.
Yeah. So what I was talking about before is during the Trump administration's first thing, I mean, I didn't understand how much my unresolved trauma was being was being gaslit. And that's when I think somewhere around there I discovered the term gaslighting and what it meant and the trigger that it was having with me. And so now I can sit through a lot of stuff. Like, people come to me and said, Trump's going to do this and he's going to do that. And I'm like, just see if RFK gets appointed. Wait for the Senate hearing and see if they're going to actually appoint the guy. Hold your breath. Like I have a feeling it's not going to pass. Anything can happen. And so now I can kind of ride through it. Now I can go, oh, I have a covert narcissist gaslighting me. Okay, that's fine. All right, let's try and, ride it and understand where they're coming from. Let's try and finesse it and not react emotionally. I try and monitor my emotions during those times. And so hopefully, I've been doing what you guys have talked about where I'm trying to build that muscle. And then I choked them out. No, I'm just kidding.
Close. You were doing pretty good there, Chris.
Yeah. I'm still working on building that muscle.
But that naming piece is so good. That's what we, and we have some stories in there. I mean, Joel tells a really great story about being in his gym and just this kind of ability to kind of take the pause and naming to himself what's going on so that his next move would be driven from a place of just purpose instead of reaction, and all the emotions that come up in that reaction, particularly if there's trauma, right? Whether that's shame or, fear, anxiety, it brings you, it's like a time capsule that can bring you back and you're not totally aware, but you're back to being that, whatever it is, 10-year-old or 9-year-old, whatever that trauma happened. And, it sounds like you've done some like really, really good and important work to like be able to just,
it was a lobotomy mostly.
Yeah.
I mean, by the end of this podcast, people will have a very different brain than when they started.
They better, damn it. They better. It's funny. I think I get more out of the podcast, our guests, than anybody does. I get a front
you have a fascinating job, Chris. You get to talk to all these amazing people. I mean, accepting ourselves, we're just delighted to be able to talk to you. But you get to learn so much, and I think, listen, like it's a dream. My alternate career was to be a journalist, actually. Yeah. Because you just learn a lot being a journalist.
Plus, what I love is, we monitor the channels. A lot of people come on from the big book publishers that you're from. They'll do CNN, MSNBC, CBS, and then they're on our show. And we'll be watching them live. And there's, those big news agencies, they only have, 30 seconds, 3 minutes or something. When we had Peter Strzok on the show, it really bothered me that Peter Strzok, the FBI agent who was on the Mueller Commission, and he did what a lot of guys do who have been married for a long time, and he had an affair. I've a lot of my guy friends around me. Sometimes it's the wife too. But I was more concerned about my democracy, and I'm like, why are they filling every 3 minutes of the spots about his messages and the salaciousness of some chick? I want to get to the stuff about my democracy and whether or not we're going to have capitalism and shit tomorrow. And so I was able to get him on the show. And the other thing we were able to do was humanize him. Who are you? Why did you name these things after the Rolling Stones, and really talk about what a human being these people were. And so it was really nice to get that flushed out and see somebody and see a different side of him. You know, we had, I don't know, that's pertinent to what we're talking about. We had the Tiger King lady on the show. At the end of the show, I said, "What's something no one knows about you?" And she goes, "I'm allergic to cats." I about fell off my fucking chair.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
She goes, "That's why my eyes are always red and I look puffy." And I'm like, You work in this pit? Okay, all right. You know, it's like me it's like me saying I'm allergic to microphones.
Yeah.
But even Brett Crozier was the Navy captain. Brett Crozier was the one I was referencing earlier.
Oh, yeah.
He had the episode where, Trump was assailing him, wanted him removed, they wanted to take his retirement. Everything was ugly. And he's on the show. It's the most funniest thing to watch. And he really taught me a lot about, I'm used to being a bombastic CEO and leader. I'm used to, getting up on the soapbox and being the cheerleader and the drum beat, blah, 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 But he really showed me that there's a different side to being a leader that can be quiet yet powerful. And I asked him on the show, I said, "So what does it feel like?" I asked Peter this and a few other people that have been in the Trump aim. What's it like to have the president of the free world, the most powerful guy, have a number on you? And Brett Crozier just as calmly, and we talked before the show, his Bible is meditations. And we talk, and I go, what's that like? And as calmly and as nonchalant and as you could tell there was no emotional damage or no emotional sort of footprint of what happened left behind. He just goes, "Meh, everybody has their own opinion. Everybody's entitled to their opinion." That's what he said. I about fell off my fucking chair because he just said it just like it was nothing.
Yeah. There's a lot of self-work in that, right? You know? And
having that stillness, that calmness, that pause that you guys talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, so now I think the hardest part for me is recognizing when we've entered the conflict zone with some people.
Yeah.
Because like sometimes you're talking to someone and you think, hey, we're just shooting the shit over coffee. And then you don't realize you've stepped into conspiracy theory number 5 billion.
Yeah. Chris, it's interesting. We talk about that, right? This very specific thing that we call conflict tolerance. And we divide into two different things, right? What we call conflict recognition and conflict holding. So it's a lot of jargon, but just it is what you said, right? That there are times I experience this, and Joelle does as well, where I'm having a fun debate, right? Whatever, we're talking about some policy. I don't experience it as conflict at all. The other person thinks the relationship is on the line. We have different levels of what's qualifying or recognizing as conflict. Joelle and I have very different ones. I have a very high conflict recognition. I can be going at it with him and and meanwhile, now I know this about him, right? But before this, right, he might be feeling like, oh my gosh, like Bob is so upset, and I'll just go on to the next event, right? The other piece of conflict tolerance is what we call conflict holding, right? Once we've kind of calling it a conflict, how well do we hold it or do we run for the hills? And for me, sometimes once I feel like, oh, now we're in conflict, I can get avoidant because my issue I struggle with is always wanting to preserve the relationship.
Oh.
So I'll be in a big I'll be in a big back and forth with you thinking the relationship's not at stake because we're just having fun.
Yeah.
But as soon as I think, oh, you're really actually upset with me, now it changes. And so each of us have these different thresholds on this.
Yeah. It's interesting. I would go far into it because I was kind of like you, and I'm like thinking, okay, we're joking around, and okay, maybe you got conspiracy theories and whatever, but then you realize that this is battle, and I'm not really. I got a sword sticking out the back of me now, and and I'm like, wow. And then I have to be careful because of that trauma that I don't go full, warrior mode and like, we're gonna fight now. Let's go next level. You brought a gun, I brought a, you brought a knife, I brought a gun, and you brought a nuclear weapon, and and then you're not friends anymore.
Yeah.
And so, how do you deal? This is probably something people should read the book, as we always say. We like to just tease things out, but the one thing I have lost with people is the conspiracy theory stuff. And part of it is It's even worse sometimes than religion, because they can spout off just a logistics timeline or spire of data that they can just start whipping shit at you, and somehow they've connected it all. The Bilderberg family's connected to the smog in the sky and the frogs that are turning gay, I guess, but they can pounce it out so far that it's hard to break that up. If you argue with me a point, I go, okay, let's take this part of what you're talking about and let's tear that down and deal with it, and then we'll move to the next one. But when somebody's it's that onslaught, and it doesn't even have to be a lot, it's just they've connected so many dots to so many extremities of possibility that you're just like, holy fucking shit, where do I even start?
Yeah. In the last part of our book, one of the things we try to give some guidance on is how do you make that call about whether to stay in this or not? And I think that's what you're talking about here, right? And we have some diagnostic questions, which I would send people to, right? But at the most basic level, I think there has to be a question of not whether they're skillful or whether they're good listeners, but whether you think they're in any way in good faith. And I think if the answer to that question is no, they're in a silo, they're not in connection or a relationship with you, then the question is, like, how do I exit? Because again, going back to what we were saying earlier, right? This is a book that, and this is about how do we sit with the discomfort of our disagreement. It is not a book of how do we sit with people who are of bad faith, are wholly unhinged, and are like, won't actually listen and do a bit of reciprocation, which is different from whether they're skillful, right? I mean,
you're talking about Elon Musk on Twitter, right?
Say it again. Yeah.
Talking about Elon Musk on Twitter, unhinged, right?
Yeah.
I'm just teasing. But you bring up a good point. I was going to bring this up earlier in the show because we kind of touched on how the fabric of our society is coming apart, and the United Healthcare CEO shooting of the murder of him by that young boy. I'm not going to repeat his name. To see so many people in our society celebrate that, the killing of another human being over a differentiation of ideas, and maybe I've just had too many historians and too many psychologists on the show. I don't claim to be smart, but I think I understand where a society goes if it decides that violence really is the answer instead of what we've talked about here, healthy debate. And like, I was even kind of shocked by some of my friends online that were dancing over it, and I'm like, do you understand where this leads to? I mean, the guillotines are great, but whoever rolls out the guillotines first ends up on the guillotines last. And, you got to be careful about these things. But, you guys, we spoke earlier in the show about how we've kind of reached the point of a society where we're kind of turning to violence because of the tribalism and all that stuff. And it's not going to end well for anybody. So
it is not going to end well. My mentor, the person who in many ways animated why I have pursued the career that I have, was a guy named Roger Fisher. So he wrote a very famous book called Getting to Yes, which you may have heard of.
Yeah, I read
and founded the Harvard Negotiation Project. Wow. He interrupted his studies at Harvard to fight in World War II. When he returned, all of his roommates were dead.
Wow.
And he set for himself a goal of trying to work on the idea of the nonviolent resolution of conflict. And one of the things that he said, which I think, I haven't struggled with, but it is that all violence is at some basic level a failure of our empathy to understand the perspective of the other, which doesn't mean we would agree with them. It doesn't mean we would join with them, but that somehow if we saw the world the way they saw it, we would do something different or have some different feeling. And to think about that World War II generation, that greatest generation that's almost not with us anymore, and then a world that's moving back in some of the dangerous directions that brought that world on feels deeply saddening to me. But it's within each individual one of our power to try to change and shift and reverse that in some way.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if we bring these types of skills to more people, especially young people, I think that starts to give me a sense of hope. I mean, I think there's this one story in the book about kind of a preschool in the Netherlands where they're trying to introduce conflict mediation with amongst the kids, and there's somebody who wears like a blue hat. And so whenever kids get into a fight or they disagree on something, they'll go to that person wearing the blue hat and they'll talk through kind of the issues, and they'll kind of navigate it together. But what was really fascinating to me was not the fact that this kind of mediation kind of person existed in the playground, but that the person wearing the blue hat was a kid. It was another one of their classmates, another preschooler. So these are skills that any of us can learn. And I think it's the kinds of skills that we need to start instilling more and more across everybody we're in contact with, because it is a matter of kind of societal existence.
You guys spoke to how the empathy and trying to understand each other. There's two things that I found have worked well for me. One is, if at first I have to determine if the person I'm talking and really wants to debate politics is a person that, we can have a mature debate and a fairly calm debate. There's certain people that, you've probably seen them on videos of being interviewed at rallies, that there's no way you can have a calm conversation with them. But there's ways to debate. So usually when I sit down with people at that and I go, okay, look, I'm a Democrat, I'm a moderate Democrat. Actually, now I'm an independent, but we need to clean up the Democratic Party. But, I've been a Republican. I've been a liberal. They moved the goalposts on me, those Hamas people there at Harvard. Did they do that at Harvard? Anyway, we won't get into it. But, they do a lot of colleges, which is interesting. But, and so I say, look, but we're going to have this debate as Americans. You and I are Americans. This country was founded on the ideal of being Americans together. We're in the same boat. So this isn't about your party versus mine. This is about, how do we live together and agree and make compromise as Americans? Yeah. And anytime it gets into the Democrats do this, liberals do that, GOP does that, and Republicans do that, and whoa. And so some of it is like boundaries a little bit, being able to establish those boundaries in the thing. Recently, I had a good friend that came back in my friendship in my life from high school, and it was like, I don't know, it was just wonderful to have a friend from that era again. And we were getting along fine. And then I discovered that they're really into conspiracy theories. And like who's the conspiracy guy who had the radio channel? And he just paid like $1 billion and stuff.
Oh,
Alex Jones.
Alex Jones. Yeah.
Yeah, Alex Jones. So they make Alex Jones look like an amateur. And so what I had to finally do, because it was starting to come out and bleed out, and they kind of knew that this wasn't going to go well with me. And so I had to have a sit down with them and go, I love you and I care about you as a friend, but there's a certain boundary that we have to establish. You're welcome to believe what you want to believe. I'm not going to try and debate or change what you feel about that. But I can't have that conversation with you. I don't want to go down that road. And so we're going to have this boundary. So I don't know if you guys talk about boundaries in the book, too, as establishing these things.
I mean, we absolutely do. The last part of our book really talks about kind of what are the ground rules or boundaries, right? And how do we choose together, right, whether we're going to talk about something. And if the answer is yes, how we're going to talk about it. Oh. And because we may decide, right? I mean, and then sometimes we even talk about, do I want to stay engaged on this issue with you or not? And if so, what are the ground rules? But then there's a second level that we can't always actually have a choice over, but do I want to stay engaged with you, period? So now with you and your high school friend, right, you can make the decision to say, you know what, sayonara. That's a little bit harder to do if it's your, sister. I mean, I mean, you could choose to limit how your number of interactions, but at some level, your sister's your sister. Yeah. But we do really talk about, and I actually think this is a best practice, talking about, like, mutually talking about what are the hard conversations we're willing to have with each other, and then how are we going to do that? We have an example in the book of siblings, both of whom actually want to engage really hard conversations, but they're doing it in a way where one of them is getting consistently shut down. And so in order to be able to succeed at the conversation that they actually want to have, they have to have a prerequisite conversation of why is the way we're doing this constantly resulting in bad feeling and shut down, and can we do it differently? Yeah. And so those are all really critical, important choices that need to be made as part of being conflict resilient.
Joelle, do you want to jump in here at all?
I mean, I think, yeah. I mean, this figuring out kind of how we engage with each other. I mean, these are more of kind of these skills that we've learned from kind of emulating the people around us, right? So if we kind of followed kind of how our parents kind of related with each other, right? And not everybody has a really healthy kind of childhood experience. I mean, these are the things that, especially at a young age, really become imprinted in our brain. And this is kind of our expectation of what engaging in a difficult situation is. And I think what's helpful is to be able to kind of spot that for yourself first, kind of that internal work. And I think this is kind of a core part of what we're kind of addressing here, which is counterintuitive, is kind of doing that internal work, because you often think it's the other person that's the problem. And, sometimes they are part of the problem, but they're not 100% the problem, because some of that is kind of how you're responding to it and your decision or kind of your contribution to the situation. And so we want to help people to be able to kind of develop a new framework or a new template for what these conversations can look like. And the change is not going to be easy. It's going to be pretty awkward, actually, especially when you're bringing it up in certain contexts where you're having to use it, like at work or with a sibling, right? To say, hey, I want to have a awkward conversation with you. And that is, I think the way that we're having these conversations at the dinner table for the holiday, are not productive, or really end up with me or you kind of, or kind of being upset or upsetting the people at the table. And so let's have an open conversation about maybe a new way that we can do things, and maybe that situation will blow up in your face. But I think more likely, and this is kind of part of what Bob and I really believe strongly, is that this will open a new door to be able to think of a new way to engage with things, because we don't have the imagination to see kind of how things could be. We end up feeling a sense of a lack of agency, and we end up turning to these reactions or these kind of behaviors that are just very reactive and inconsistent with our values, like violence, like cutting people out in your life who you deeply value.
I don't know if you get it into victimhood in the book, but a lot of our society has turned into a very emotionalism victimhood society, and sometimes that's hard to overcome. But people definitely need to buy your book and read it. Final thoughts as we go out, give people a pitch on where to pick up the book and get to know you guys better, .coms, et cetera, et cetera.
Great. For our book, go to conflictresiliencebook.com. You can buy the book right now at any of your favorite booksellers. Just also to say, this is a topic that we think cuts across age groups, as this conversation has said, across professional contexts. Wherever you sit in the world, if you have a relationship, then you have some conflict. And wherever you sit on your capability, whether you are deathly afraid of it and want to avoid, or feel like your whole life is a big battle, you have a capacity and ability to improve at this. And yeah, that is the kind of the promise and hope of the book. Joelle.
Yep. Conflict is everywhere, right? It's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And the skills that we're kind of proposing here are really a combination of kind of life skills, but also leadership skills, and they're also business skills. So we think that they're extremely valuable skills for anybody. And regardless of whether or not you decide to buy this book, I think just being aware of how you handle conflict and kind of your reaction to it will be a big help for you. And so we're here to help to kind of provide a little bit more of that framework and structure for people who want that kind of homework and the ability to kind of hack that a little bit faster. But I think our big message together is really we want people to go beyond just thinking, how can I fix the problem or make it go away, and really focus on what else can we get from this situation if we just are able to sit and kind of be with that discomfort.
Guys, I hope a lot of people read the book and we can change the world and get back to talking to each other. I think it's really important. You know, I became a moderate Democrat, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. And I really tried to focus on looking at both sides of the party. And, you know, we had some people that used to, you know, Reagan and Tip O'Neill used to work together.
Amen.
Who was the guy who used to do Hardline? Was it Hardball?
Chris Matthews.
Chris Matthews
Yeah.
on the show. Yeah. And he talked about how Tip O'Neill, you know, back in the day, you know, they would try and find consensus. And, you know, those are the conversations I have where we go, we're both Americans here. You know, I can see why, you know, you're for abortion, you're against abortion. We have to live together, so we have to compromise. You know, married people have to compromise. You know, we all have to compromise.
Yeah.
And, you know, how do we make it work? We can't just have this, you know, we talked about the tribalism of my way or the highway, you know. We need to ship the XYZ party out and everybody in it to an island, you know. You can't do that. We're in a big country. We got to get along. And I mean, thankfully, we're kind of blessed with democracy where we're supposed to talk out our issues. But, you know, so I hope people read the book, and I'll be reading it in March 2025. It comes out, folks. Order it wherever fine books are sold. Pre-order it now. Conflict resolution. It's been a long day.
It's a word mouth. It's a big word.
Conflict resilience. Negotiating disagreement without giving up or giving in. And then the second book should be coming out the year after, and not choking the person out. I'm kidding. We're all professionals here. But it's a nice thought. Yeah, you can think of it. Just don't do it. Anyway, guys, thanks for tuning in. Thanks to my guests for being with us on the show. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss. Chris Voss wanted to take talkity, and violence is never the answer, folks. Be good to each other. Stay safe. We'll see you next time. That should have us out.